Joining us bright and early here on Live Now from Fox to discuss the very latest on the race to the White House, none other than political analyst and historian Rich Rubino. Rich, happy Monday. Good morning to you.
Happy Monday. Good morning to you as well.
So, listening there to Rebecca's story, it's crazy to think that just so close to Election Day, still several people don't know who they are going to vote for. Depending on who you ask, they might say, well, it's because we don't really understand either side's position on the issues.
And there are actually very few of these voters. We're at a point now where it's really about trying to rev up the base, trying to bring out as many for Trump, hardcore Republicans, conservatives, for Kamala Harris, hardcore progressives, hardcore Democrats, and to bring out low propensity voters, people who are on their side, but don't necessarily have a political interest, to try to bring them out. It's actually very few voters. If you think about it, it's less than 100,000 voters, really only in 7 showdown states. I think that Donald Trump's strategy is really interesting and unconventional. He went obviously to Madison Square Garden. Obviously, New York is a state that he lost by 23 points, hasn't gone for a Republican since Ronald Reagan's landslide in 1984. But he figures with all the national press that he can get out of there, that national press will matriculate and flow into the swing states. So it's a very interesting strategy. Vice President Harris actually took a detour and went to Texas campaigning. I think she figures the same thing. She can get a lot of coverage in some of the neighboring states, like Arizona, like some of the close states to Texas, like Arizona and Nevada, and perhaps maybe try to help Democratic Senator Colin Allard. So it's a little bit different than normally, where you just go into the showdown states.
Rich, so many great points you're making this morning. And one thing that stands out, how unconventional this race is. We don't know which way it will go. You heard in the story, and as you just mentioned, how by just a few percentage points, how one person might be in the lead compared to the other. What does that say about the state of the race and the importance of every vote this election season?
It says that this country and the voting population, the body politic, is extremely bifurcated right now. We really don't know, unless the polls are just completely off, unless there's somehow a surreptitious or a secret Harris voter or a secret Trump voter that we don't know about. It's basically going to be an extremely close election. Now, theoretically, the popular vote, I think, is going to be close. I don't see a scenario where it won't be close, but theoretically, one candidate could win a landslide in the Electoral College by potentially winning 6 or 7 of the swing states by 1 or 2 points. Remember, in those showdown states, all you have to do is beat your opponent by 1 vote, and you win it. Like, for example, in Pennsylvania, if you win by 1 vote, or if you win by 1,000,000 votes, you still garner that's 19 electoral votes. So it could be very close in the national popular vote, but it could also be theoretically a landslide in the Electoral College, I think.
For many this morning, this might be their first election. Can you explain the difference between the popular vote and the electoral vote, if you don't mind, Rich?
The $64,000 question, yes. So basically, the national popular vote is simply whoever gets more votes. For example, if you're campaigning for, take a gubernatorial, a senatorial race, a state representative race, whoever gets more votes than the person than the person behind them, basically it's called first past the post, wins that election. So if you're running for a governor and say you win 2 million votes and the guy below you wins 175,000 votes, it doesn't matter which towns or cities you win. It's all based on the national popular vote. In the Electoral College, basically what it is currently 48 states award all of their electors. When you go to vote, you're not actually voting for the candidate, you're voting for electors who will select the candidate. Even though we say you're voting for this candidate or that candidate, you're actually voting for electors. So take a state like, for example, a state like Pennsylvania, there are 19 electoral votes. So it doesn't matter who wins the national popular vote. You could win the national popular vote and still lose in the state of Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania has 19 electoral votes. So consequently, it's basically a state by state race. So this goes all the way back to the Constitutional Convention of 1787. The convention could not agree on how to award their electoral votes. They said the states can award their electoral votes. Basically, they have plenary authority any way they please. Maine and Nebraska are the only 2 states that do it differently. In Maine and Nebraska, basically, whoever wins so take a state like Maine, whoever wins the state of Maine wins 2 electoral votes for the 2 senators that they have. Then there are 2 other votes, And instead of awarding those two other votes, because they have two congressional districts in the state of Maine, they instead award those electoral votes to whoever wins the congressional district. So there's the first congressional district and the second congressional district. The first congressional district is demonstrably Democrat. The second congressional district is basically a swing state, a swing district. The same in Nebraska. Nebraska, whoever wins the two electoral votes which will likely go Republican. Then there are three electoral votes based on congressional districts, and there's one congressional district around Omaha that could go for the Democrat, essentially. So if you're voting a state like Massachusetts or Utah or Idaho, essentially you know how the results are going to be. Your vote is a lot more coveted if you happen to be in Pennsylvania, Nevada, or Georgia, because in those states you have to win the state. It's not a matter of necessarily winning the national popular vote.
Rich, thank you so much for that detailed breakdown. And understanding this notion, do you think it adds to the importance of early voting compared to voting on election day?
I think just basically to make sure that you do it in case there's some sort of a crisis on election day. But obviously, your vote is a lot more coveted, and it really, frankly, does matter more if you live in a state that is a state like Pennsylvania. Now, there's always a possibility that there could be some sort of a landslide, that there could be a state that becomes competitive that hasn't really been competitive in the election, and all of a sudden one candidate wins. But we basically know, for the most part, how at least 43 states, maybe you say 40 states, a state like New Hampshire maybe will become a swing state. It's be kind of on the periphery, but we basically know how 43 states are going to go, but it's really those 7 states that are just so coveted by all the presidential campaigns.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, we don't know what might happen on election day. I think that further adds to the concerns of many
Mhm.
Americans this morning about, okay, should I mail in my ballot or should I just show up to the polls? There's the concern about election interference. And then, of course, technology, right? We're going to see it happen as the press conferences are being held on election day. People are reaching out to the media, complaining, saying that things are happening inside of the polls that aren't supposed to happen.
Yes, absolutely. And we don't know the validity of this. We don't know. Obviously, anybody can say that there is some sort of voter fraud. We really don't know. I think the best thing is probably to get there early and to just try to make your vote count earlier, because you really don't know what's going to happen. Also, you may say, if you live in one of those other 43 states, you may say, well, does that mean my vote doesn't necessarily matter? Does that mean that the state has already decided? But there are also down ballot races. There's maybe, in 34 states, there's a Senate race, there's a congressional race, there are ballot initiatives, there are down ballot races, there are state representatives races. So there's the ballot. When you go to vote, you're not only voting for president, you might have seven, eight, nine other offices or ballot questions to vote for as well.
Rich, I don't know if it's too soon to ask you this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. A lot of analysts are looking to see if the election will actually be over on election day. If we look back in recent years, we know there was the concern of voter fraud, also the concern of maybe a miscount of ballots and those types of things. And we know former President Donald Trump, he does not play as it comes to this. So I asked that question, do you think it'll be November 7th before we get the final count, or even November 8th?
My guess is it's going to be a few days later. I really don't see a scenario. It is so close. Now, will it be like 2000 with the hanging chads in Florida? I don't think it's going to be like that, but I think it's going to be so close. I think my guess is it's probably going to be a couple of days before we know what the result is going to be. And it is very hard for me to envisage a scenario, unless it's a complete landslide, where one candidate will immediately concede the election. I think that they're so vested. I think their supporters are so vested in them. They're so much invested in this election that they will probably take just about every possible avenue to try to make certain to try to make certain that every single vote is counted. So my guess is that November 7th, we will not have a winner. We'll have a winner from other races. We might not know, though, who holds the House of Representatives, because there'll probably be about 10 races that won't be decided. We might not know who holds the United States Senate, because there might be 3 or 4 races that are so close that we don't know when they're going to be decided. So basically, November 7th probably will not be the day. That is my prediction.
Rich Rubino, always a pleasure having you on the show. Thank you so much for your expertise and perspective on the race to the White House. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we let you go?
No, that's it. Just that it's probably not going to be decided on November 7th, and it's going to be a very interesting race. And very unconventional strategies, and also that Donald Trump will be visiting Virginia the weekend before the election. Virginia is not really a swing state. It's really kind of it's become more of a purple. It's become from a purple to a blue state to a Democratic state. But his basic strategy now is, instead of just going in and making it a micro campaign where you go into essentially every county of Pennsylvania, he's making it a national campaign, and he's trying to, from the national, he's trying to get local press from the from doing national campaign rallies. This is something that is very rarely done in America. It is very much of a political gamble. And if he does lose, I think that somebody will come back and they'll say, if you hadn't spent that time in New York, if you hadn't spent that time in Virginia, if that was one more day you would spend in Wisconsin or Michigan, perhaps you would have won. But it's a strategy that I think that obviously they've had some internal polling that shows that they think they can do that. They think that this is a better strategy than simply just barnstorming every showdown state in the country.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what it's going to come down to for many people this election season: who has the better political strategy. So great point as always, Rich. Thank you so much for joining us on this Monday. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. You as well.